Happy Thursday morning, everybody. Boy, do we have some stuff to discuss on this week's episode of Bammers. Ben, this time a week ago, I honestly don't remember what we talked about last time regarding the Iron Bowl. I don't remember what my perceptions were going into the game anymore. I don't remember anything that happened before about 1 minute to go in the fourth quarter of that game. It feels like it was a different lifetime because that game, and really in some ways perhaps the entire season, took a huge pivot very, very late in the 2021 Iron Bowl. And we'll go through it. We'll talk about it. I want to get everybody's reactions to it here in the comments today. But Ben, I think it's safe to say it's a moment in Alabama football history that we will be remembering for a long time, regardless of what happens from here on out this season.
Absolutely. It was thrilling, and I've been pretty consistent, I think, on this show about how much I hate good games. And I hated this good game too, Matt. This was one of those that had a really satisfying ending, but file it under 2009 Iron Bowl, 2009 Tennessee game, 2017 Georgia National Championship game. Just absolutely grueling to get to that satisfying finale. But I guess the feeling overcame all of the stress and dread that we were feeling as we were watching it leading up to that, where pretty much everything that could have gone wrong for Alabama went wrong. Like, I mean, you can just go down the list of penalties, ejections, all of these, and just stalled out offense. Thankfully, the defense played extremely well, obviously led by Will Anderson, who was just a beast again. But it was an amazing defensive performance. It was one they needed at the exact time that they got it. So, credit to Auburn for their defensive performance. They held Alabama's offense, which we obviously know can be fairly inconsistent, but is still very explosive at times, especially when you have the Heisman frontrunner and Bryce Young under center. And it took him a while to get his footing and figure out what the Auburn defense was doing, led by Derek Mason, obviously. But they did. It resulted in that amazing, now historic, in Alabama lore 97-yard drive that would tie the game and lead it to 4 overtimes. So, yeah, it was an amazing sequence to watch at the end of the game. But I cannot lie, I did not enjoy the first quarter and a half, or first 3 quarters and a half.
Yeah, I think that's part of what's so strange about it, Ben, is it was simultaneously. I mean, and this season has had some positive moments, I think, for Alabama fans watching this team, but I cannot possibly imagine that there is a moment so far this year that would be up there in terms of positive feelings, in terms of excitement level, from before what happened at the end of this game. I mean, it honestly might be up there with one of the. I mean, we'll have to discuss this in the offseason at some point, but it might be up there as one of the best, most thrilling moments of the entire Saban era at Alabama, because I think there is an excitement and a joy to winning and being dominant. But for the most part, Alabama has not had a ton of big, thrilling, win at the last second type moments. And now obviously the 2017 national title game would be an exception to that. But this has got to be up there. But within the same game that contained that moment of pure elation was also really 59 minutes of pure misery for Alabama fans. One of the worst performances that we've seen from an Alabama team in the Saban era, going back to 2007. The offense just wasn't able to do anything. The offensive line was getting overwhelmed. You're losing key players left and right. Jamison Williams goes out on what felt like a totally needless penalty early in the game. You're watching Auburn players mock him for the whole rest of the game, mock his celebration. There's endless shots on TV, and worse if you were there in person, of Auburn fans just beside themselves with joy enjoying Alabama's misery throughout this game. It was so strange, Ben, that there was the high, one of the high points of the Saban era with one of the low points in the same game.
Yeah, what are the holidays if you're not enjoying other people's misery, Matt? Certainly, what is the Iron Bowl?
I don't begrudge them that, to be clear. I think it is part of the rivalry, and
Yeah.
I am sure that the opposite would have been happening where the sides switched.
Thanksgiving week too, but that's just what the Iron Bowl is at this point. Yeah, a lot of butterfly effect stuff happening, like in retrospect, right? Like the Jamison Williams ejection. Wasn't that punt tipped? Like, wasn't it partially blocked? So if that punt gets off and it results in a fair catch or a different type of return, if that doesn't get tipped on impact, does Jamison Williams get ejected for targeting? If Jamison Williams is still in the game, does he pop off for a couple of game-breaking deep pass touchdowns like he has in so many games leading up to it? So there are plenty of what ifs that we can ask about the game. But the fact of the matter is that Auburn had a really good game plan for the offense, and the offense didn't execute it like it normally does, or at least wanted to. And so, as a commenter is saying right now, the team showed a lot of competitive character, and that's what Saban spoke to at the end of the game. Saban's always interested in how competitive is a team, right? Or how competitive is an individual? Like, that's a really important metric for him, however you want to quantify it. And the team proved that they're incredibly competitive, and they've proven that pretty much throughout the season, that they're scrappy, right? Like, they're 11-1, and they're an underdog going into this game. But I don't know that we've had a team at Alabama under Nick Saban that has been as scrappy as this team. Like, they're just ready for like fist fights, and it doesn't really matter who the team is. They play up and down to their competition, whether it's Florida, Arkansas, Auburn. It's just been a grind, to say the least. Tennessee in the first half of that game. So the good thing, though, is that Alabama has won these games, right? And even with Texas A&M, we've talked about it plenty of times. They scrapped their way back into it. They fell short that time, but they finished the season 11-1. And I just want to make a quick point going into this game, Matt, that this is seen by many as a down year for Alabama. A down year for Alabama that happens to be 11-1, on the cusp of potentially winning the SEC championship, potentially making the college football playoff, potentially winning the college football playoff if they make it, maybe winning the Heisman, maybe having more than one Heisman finalist, having a Biletnikoff finalist, having arguably the defensive player of the year. And this is a down year for this team. So it's just amazing when you kind of like contextualize how this season ends, especially as the regular season ends, and look back on how we got to where we're at now at 11-1, and it being kind of a disappointment in the eyes of so many people, including some Alabama fans. But I think that Alabama fans are proud of the team, proud of the players. A lot of people have pointed out the players won this game with the effort that they showed, especially during that final drive and in those overtimes. So it was amazing to watch. It's a classic, but it's just not one that I'm going to relive anytime soon.
Well, I think it will not be a game that for fans who like to rewatch games, their classic games. I don't think this is one where you rewatch the whole game. I think a lot of Alabama fans will probably wait till this one gets real close to the end. But I think, Ben, what to kind of boil it down. I mean, we will talk about the SEC championship game this weekend, but this one moment, I think, for this team, you mentioned the word scrappy. It's not an adjective we use to talk about Alabama very often, because it's an adjective that typically describes underdogs, and Alabama is not usually the underdog. This is a very good team in the context of all of college football, but it isn't a dominant team when you put it in the context of the best in college football this year. This team just, I think it's safe to say that you kind of are who you are at this point in the season. This team is not going to go out there and beat the rest of the top five by 30 points apiece, the way that some other Alabama teams have in the past. Like you said, doesn't mean they can't win it all, but if they do, they're probably not going to blow the doors off on the way to doing it. So this is a team that's had to, over time, I think, adapt the way that they think about themselves. And that's actually kind of difficult at Alabama. It's a whole culture built around expecting you to blow everybody out. And if that's not who you are as a personnel group, as a team, you have to kind of, not only do you have to figure out how to win games, you have to figure out how to adjust your own expectations of yourself and figure out who your identity is. And I think this team's identity is very different from what we're used to for a lot of other Alabama teams. They have to go into this game this weekend, for example, with a different mentality. They're not going to intimidate Georgia. They're going to have to be the team that shocks Georgia. They're going to have to be the team that Georgia maybe underestimates and doesn't take as seriously as they should. And it's shocking to hear that, but it actually can. We've seen it in the past. It can put teams in a position for success when something like that happens. I don't think Georgia thinks I think Georgia is very confident that they're going to beat this Alabama team this weekend. And I think most other people are too. You look out there at the national sports media, they're all talking about the playoffs as though Alabama has already lost this game.
I don't feel that way, Matt. I know that we can watch this with like crimson colored glasses, but I don't think that Georgia is particularly scary in that they are notorious slow starters on offense too, like Alabama has been this year, and they have had close first quarters against not so great teams. Now, unlike Alabama, in some cases, they end up figuring things out, patching together a game plan, making the adjustments they need to blow those teams out, right? And it's always hard when you compare mutual opponents, but they handled Auburn, they handled Arkansas, they've handled some other teams. But I think that these teams are fairly evenly matched. Like from a statistical standpoint, our colleagues have broken it down very thoroughly on AL.com. If you want to go read about how these teams stack up next to each other statistically, Alabama has played slightly better competition, like by a slight margin, whereas Georgia has dominated the opponents that Alabama has struggled with. So we can go on and on about the statistics, but I don't really know how to feel about this. Like Georgia is like almost a touchdown favorite thereabout. Alabama was about the same type of favorite against Clemson when they played in the national championship a couple of years ago. Then Clemson beats them by 4 touchdowns. Alabama was a 20-point favorite against Texas A&M on the road, 20-point favorite against Auburn on the road, and look what happened. So we never know. And I think that this season speaks to that maybe more than ever, and especially when it comes to Alabama. We just really don't know what we're going to get. I think a lot of fans have voiced that in terms of the offense. I just don't know what I'm going to see each Saturday when they play. I think the one sort of constant with this team, though, is they seem to figure it out when they need to, right? They seem to make the plays when they need to make them. And I include Texas A&M with that. Like, again, they were down, and then they put the points together and scrapped their way back from a big hole, took the lead at the end of the game, and put themselves in a position to win. They didn't. But again, you talk about the Auburn game. When they needed a 97-yard drive to tie the game, they got it out of Bryce Young, just in terms of his poise, his ability, and now his experience that he has had over these last 12 games is just going to be incredible for him moving forward, and also the rest of the team. I think the second half was exactly, or at least the fourth quarter was exactly what the offensive line needed. They looked much better. They gave him the protection that they needed overall to get back into the game. So still a lot of questions to answer, because the same is true for the defense. There have been games this year when the defense has been incredibly dominant, and then games where you just see a different team altogether, and the other team basically moves the ball or scores at will against them. So we'll see, but I think it's going to be a really good game, like these Saban, Smart, Georgia, Alabama games have been as of late. But I don't know. I doubt that this Alabama team is intimidated.
I don't think they're intimidated, but I do wonder where everybody's head is going into this game. I think that it's possible Alabama came into this Iron Bowl, for example, thinking they'd have an easier time than they did. And I think it's also possible that with the amount of hype that Georgia has heard about them this year, it would be hard not to expect success in this game. And that's not a position that Georgia has found itself in. As successful as they've been under Kirby Smart, they've still never gotten to the big game, the big one, and had everybody expect them to win it. Have anything other than dominant success be the expectation. So, I think this is a unique position for both of these teams to find themselves in, both programs. And I'll be very curious to see how they approach it. I do think from what little I've seen so far that Georgia is the better team, but that certainly doesn't mean that they're going to win the game. Alabama was the better team than Texas A&M this year. They didn't win that game. I think this has a little bit of a feel to it, Ben, to me, of the 2009 SEC championship game, where for the most part, a lot of people would have told you that Florida team probably had more talent on it. Certainly had a better run up to that point than that Alabama team had. They had more of a benefit of the doubt going into the game, but Alabama found a way to make plays in that game. They had a little bit of what you called scrappiness that year's team too. So maybe we'll see how far the parallels go.
Yeah, Matt, the one sort of like stat that I think is rather alarming for Alabama and Alabama fans going into this, and this is not like, I don't think that this is like a real stat necessarily, but if you just go back and look at the winners of the SEC championship from the past like 15 years, really during the Saban era, the favorite usually wins this game. Like
sure.
and they're a narrow favorite, and Alabama, I think, is considered to a degree an equal with Georgia, but Georgia, like they've been pretty dominant all season. Most people expect them to win, and just because people expect you to win, that does not mean you're going to. But I mean, if you go back to the SEC championships, they have been incredibly one-sided. There have been some classics like Georgia and Alabama's SEC championships in 2018 and then 2019, but 2018, I guess, when Jalen Hurts came in and took over. But Alabama was expected to win those games, right? And so
sure.
It'll be interesting. It should be a great game. Just another great matchup between these two teams. And I think Alabama probably – I think Alabama fans kind of like the underdog role. They like it when their team is not expected to win. I think they would kind of prefer Alabama to be kind of on the outside looking in to a degree, because that's just extra motivation. And Alabama does well when they have extra motivation. This team certainly has everything in front of them. Like, if you win, you're in the playoff, but also nobody thinks you're going to win. And they've got the talent to do it, even though they're banged up. I mean, they're down to one running back, basically.
Yeah.
And so it'll be kind of – I'm not going to say it's going to be miraculous if they win, because they're Alabama. They've got talent to spare, but they're wounded at very key positions right now. And so I don't know. We'll see if Georgia can exploit that. But a lot of pressure's on Georgia to be the team that everybody thinks they should be.
Well, we will have tons of coverage of that for you guys on Saturday. Out at the SEC championship game. Going to be a big one, a rare opportunity to cheer for an underdog Alabama team. And we'll see what happens, and we'll be here to talk about it next week. So thank you, Ben, for joining us. As always, everybody go check out the Bammers podcast feed, which you can find on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Some truly great stuff after Ben just wrapped up another great season of the podcast over there. So go and find the latest episodes. Go back and listen to the first couple of seasons of it. At this point, there's a lot of great stuff in there. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We will talk to you guys again next week, and we'll see you out there this weekend if you're going to Atlanta. For Ben Flanagan, I'm Matt Scalisi, and thanks again for watching Bammers.
This show is presented by the Mercedes-Benz Tech Program. To learn more about Mercedes-Benz's world of advanced automotive technology, text the word Mercedes to 55678 or visit www.learnmercedes.com.